Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Wednesday, September the 3rd. Today we discover the date of the budget. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News.
And my name is Anne McElvoy from Politico. Welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne's, the early doors podcast that gives you everything you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in around 20 minutes. And by the way, the new term brings even more from us both. It is party conference season, and we're going to be doing extra debrief episodes straight after the party leader has done their speech. So bookmark to listen to us for that.
So the first party conference is this Friday. That's Reform UK. They're going to Birmingham to the NEC. Nigel Farage is going to be speaking on Friday afternoon. And so roughly, don't hold it to us too much, but roughly a couple of hours or so after he sits down, an episode will drop in this feed. Everything you need to know about the Reform leader's speech and what we made of it in around 20 minutes.
Bound to be exciting stuff. Hit follow in your Politics at Sam and Anne's feed if you haven't already, and you will get a notification when it and all of our episodes drop.
Right, let's get on to today. Really, I think, Anne, today is about seeing people in the flesh after what felt like an age and what felt like the government entirely leaving government communications to Yvette Cooper. She was the public face of the new term, but now we're going to get Keir Starmer in person. He'll be at Prime Minister's Questions for the first time in quite a while. But possibly more importantly, we're going to hear from the Chancellor too, who will give us the date of the budget, which could be quite late this year.
And Keir Starmer has a visitor. He'll see the Spanish Prime Minister today, Pedro Sanches, the socialist leader, Prime Minister in Spain since 2018, so quite a long time by the standards of Europe these days. Now, he has an interview on the front of The Guardian saying that the West's double standards over the wars in Ukraine and Gaza threaten to undermine its global standing. And he says that the response to Israel's assault on the Palestinian territory is one of the, quote, darkest episodes of international relations in the 21st century. So there is a European guest, Sam, with a rather more bracing view than many others from the continent who Keir Starmer goes in and out with. And that's in store for Starmer after Prime Minister's Questions.
Right, well, let's pivot back to sort of what's going on and what's being talked about in Westminster. And if I'm being honest, we're all still digesting that big shuffle round of the Prime Minister's top team, the Downing Street team that took place on Monday, and the reverberations that has been causing. And there's a bit more this morning.
Vibrations do indeed continue on that front, and the outgoing Policy and Innovation Chief, Liz Lloyd from Number 10, she's going to be made a minister in the Upper House, and I think as some sort of leaving present there from Starmer. She was out in the major shake-up in Number 10, and The Guardian saying that Starmer will appoint a whole slew of new peers to the House of Lords, remembering also that that is a chamber that once upon a time he was set to abolish.
I love the abolition of the House of Lords. It's been going on all of my adult life. Here's a little bit of intel for you, and just a little a scrap from the gutter. Before we had the big reveal on the internal Number 10 reshuffle on Monday, which, of course, the centrepiece of which was Darren Jones going into Number 10 in this new job title of Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister. There were names floating about over the summer, around in the papers, about which of the big beasts could be brought in to bolster Number 10. And Torsten Bell was floated as one such individual, but another was Jackie Smith. She herself is a member of the House of Lords, Baroness Smith, currently an Education Minister, one-time Home Secretary and Chief Whip under the sort of Blair Brown administrations. Now, what I found out was that actually her name really was a goer at one stage over the summer, but she turned it down, or in some way indicated that she didn't want it, which I thought was really interesting. And it speaks to the fact that clearly there were quite a lot of iterations of the reshuffle, internal reshuffle, before it took place on Monday. And it seems, if that's right, I think it is, I'm told by somebody reliable, it seems that not all the iterations were quite as treasury and budget focused as the one that we ended up hearing about on Monday. And of course, the whole of the narrative was stitched around this idea that Number 10 is boosting economic credibility and firepower. But that wasn't always the plan, it seems.
Well, let's focus on today, and we are going to hear from the Chancellor on the date of that budget, both the Times and our playbook at Politico, talking about the 26th as the most likely date. the last date that would qualify as an autumn budget, which is, it was news to me, Sam, that there's a kind of Gregorian calendar in these things about when you can call things a part of the autumn season. But there it is, so the 26th of November. I wondered whether that gives the government time to settle in what we've just been talking about, that their new teams and lose some of this fizziness around the personnel, and that also is quite a nice long road for Rachel Reeves, for Torsten Bell, writing the budget on her behalf, for all of that to settle down. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, it's very striking that they're going long. It means that there's going to be tinsel and Christmas trees and baubles in every window by the time it actually happens. Whether or not it is full of festive cheer, well, we it is far from clear. Look, the job of the Chancellor is just getting harder and harder in that budget, and I'd hope by this stage, listeners of this podcast in particular kind of know why, because I've been arguing, you've been arguing, the budget this autumn is the biggest moment that we're going to have, frankly. There is a black hole of something in the region of 20 to 40 billion pounds, probably closer to the 20 end than the 40 end, depending on what the OBR say, but there you go. And all of it has to be filled in the autumn budget if Rachel Reeves is going to meet her fiscal rules, which the government insist are non-negotiable. So that's the challenge. And it's a huge challenge because it's a massive amount of money and it's likely to mean tax rises, maybe some form of spending cuts, but we're not hearing about that. And the challenge around that is massive, as we heard before the summer with the welfare cuts revolt. But it's all difficult. And so, yes, go long seems to be a sensible strategy because there are no easy answers.
And it is getting trickier because, as you can see from the front pages, and particularly the more financial leaning press today, the real worries about the cost of borrowing going up and not looking as if it's easily constrainable, and a lot of talk about market jitters as well. Now, the Chancellor needs to steady that, needs to see that off. And my sense about the late date for the budget is that it does give a little time and opportunity for things to come back more into balance there. It's never going to be a completely golden scenario for Rachel Reeves in terms of PLC UK's finances. But at the moment, you've just got too many noises off saying this is all very worrying and the pound is not in a great state. So at least one or two of those things she thinks may be in a better state by the back end of November.
Yeah, you've got the cost of borrowing at a 27-year high. It's the cost of borrowing, by the way, this is for a proper, very brief geek out. It's the cost of the 30-year bonds, which so 30-year long government debt that's reached a new high. Actually, the government are trying to sell 10-year debt. So it's not the most important indicator, but it's one of them. And I mean, the bottom line is we're going to be paying more as a country to borrow. And that's going to mean less money, less pounds and pence for public services and other things. So it does nevertheless really matter. It's one of three quite bad economic indicators, the pound you mentioned, but also inflation is edging up, partly because of national insurance and for a whole host of other reasons. Food inflation is not great at the moment. And those three things, that triptych together, not great for Rachel Reeves. And because Rachel is going to have to end up spending more on debt interest, that black hole becomes even bigger and you have to find the money from somewhere else. And but I just want to put a sort of a hard block on just how much doom and gloom there is, because there have been, Anne, some newspaper front pages and some eminent economists, I have to be said, there's a former head of NISA, just starting to use the three letters that cause more dread and more panic than any others, which is IMF. And the suggestion being maybe things could slip so far out of control that you end up having to go to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, for some kind of bailout, like Britain did in the 1970s. Now, if you go anywhere near this topic, the Treasury will get cross with you. They will absolutely rebut it. They have to for confidence reasons, but I think they're also pretty genuinely sure that this isn't sort of credible route of argument. But I know you have particularly strong views on this. And do you want to explain why you think we're not about to all head to the IMF and have them set our kind of our borrowing and our spending policy as happened in the 1970s?
Well, simply because however bad this gets, that seems like one of the less likely endpoints for this. To that extent, hey, this is an unusual morning. I back the Treasury orthodoxy on that one. Because to look at that idea of going, and it's always said cap in hand to the IMF, going back to that crisis in the 70s, that was caused really by currency crisis. Now, there's a lot going on at the moment, but it's not really the weakness of the pound that is driving the problems for the UK economy in the same way. And if you go back into the history of what happened, which is a really fascinating story back then, it was also about the particular interrelation of that with the US. Now, there are other ways now. Everything could turn out to be very difficult. And one thing we haven't reflected enough is the American economy could at some point really be getting ready to get the yips, as Donald Trump put it, in a more serious way when he used that obscure golfing term. But the more likely thing, Sam, is that you're just very punished by the markets. And we've seen that happen in the Truss era. We've seen Rachel Reeves trying to avoid it. But there's lots of things you then have to do. You have to raise taxes, you have to cut your spending. But actually, it's quite a long road. That's quite hard for me to see why you end up going to the IMF unless you're into some repetition of the precise circumstances that pertained in the 70s. So yes, it's theoretically possible, but it seems to me that there are many other things that might be very difficult to swallow that would have to happen first.
Anne's nailed her colours to the mast. No caps, no hands.
Let's start with that one, thanks to Sam.
None of that is to minimise the problem. Right. So I just want to tell you what's been hurting my head about the current situation. We have this challenge, which we, I think, agree is the biggest of the autumn, which is how to fill the black hole. But we're not hearing about it. We're not hearing about it from government ministers. If you were to listen to Keir Starmer's kind of opening remarks on Monday, the sort of, listen to him on the radio on Monday afternoon and look at what he's saying in the paper, all that kind of stuff. The vibe that you're getting from the very top is business as normal, right? You're not getting what you had a year ago after Labour came in, where by this stage in the budget process, there were loud warnings that there were going to have to be tax rises, difficult decisions, red flashing lights, problems that need to be dealt with, right? There's none of that. Now, I asked a government figure yesterday, every single credible economist and economic forecasting outfit is saying there's this black hole. And you can see from space, because there have been U-turns on policy and there's likely to be a possibly not massive productivity downgrade, but there's likely to be a productivity. Why are we not hearing anything? And they just said, look, behind closed doors, and this is a quote, there is genuine terror, close quotes, about what's going on, because nobody is talking about what's going on openly in government. Maybe there's a bit in the Treasury that is, but there isn't a wider discussion in government about what's going on. Capital Economics puts the black hole at 26 billion, Bloomberg Economics over 20, NISA at 40 billion, although that might be a bit much. But it isn't being discussed. And they said, there's a lot of sort of hear no evil, see no evil. People don't want to sort of almost sort of, and these are my words now, sort of poke the bear and push this one. Now, there was a cabinet meeting yesterday. I'm told at the cabinet meeting, the Chancellor did make an intervention, but that was in favour of high-skilled migration. No, slightly different tone from what Yvette Cooper was talking about this week, but not how we're going to deal with this massive jumbo problem, which seems to be, the thinking behind why we did the internal reshuffle on Monday the way that we did is to deal with this, but there is no public conversation. That, by the way, Anne, is why I'm so fascinated. We are going to hear sort of slightly more from Rachel Reeves this afternoon, and I think there's going to be an interview, a friendly interview. And I think looking at her tone, is there any of this difficult decisions, red flashing lights, tax rises to come? Is there any of that built into the language? I would have expected it from the Prime Minister at the start of term. He didn't do it. Does he leave it all to her? Does he make her own all the difficult decisions? Or does she just do business as normal as well? There's quite a lot riding on what we hear from her today.
Yeah, it's a very good point. We've heard relatively little from the Chancellor since that terrible, humiliating period that she had there after the failure of the Welfare and Disability Bill to go through as she intended and to make those big cuts that she wanted there. And she was out and about this week. I noticed very smiley. Smiley seemed to be the message. It was sort of strange because the rest of the government is in kind of serious head down mode. But it's like a difficult one for Rachel Reeves, isn't it? If she doesn't smile now, it's like, oh, is she really upset? And if she does smile, it's like, what have you got to be happy about? So as you say, it's kind of tonally that will be an interesting re-entry for her. She's getting some advice from a veteran. Liz Truss is back on the block. No, no, don't laugh. She's been talking to our mutual friend Wilfred Frost on his podcast about economic stagnation, the failures of the OBR as she sees them, and says there's no doubt we've lost our way. It's interesting. She still really wants to be part of that economic debate. And one thing you can say about Liz Truss is, she doesn't give up. She never gives up when says, well, I'm going away now. I'm going to be quiet for a bit. I know she's about to embark on a big set of visits to the US, for instance, where she has a bit of a profile. But I was talking, Sam, to a senior figure on Kemi Badenoch's team who admitted that one of the problems they have as they try to talk about fiscal stability and what the Tory vision of the economy is, that they're still in a post-Truss world and that is hard to shake off. They would say the government is getting dangerously close to it for the reasons that you just raised about the worried mood round the block. But it's still a problem for the Conservatives when Liz Truss pops up.
Totally. I absolutely agree with that. All I'd say is, for all that the kind of the default reaction of every Labour MP or Labour figure when Liz Truss's name is mentioned is to say, "Oh, it's wonderful to hear from her every time she opens her mouth. It's good for us." I do wonder whether there are now quite a few Labour MPs who listen to Liz Truss's comment on the OBR and don't just think maybe she's got a bit of a point, because Rachel Reeves' future, this government's future, the size of the black hole, all depends on judgments by this unelected body created by George Osborne, particularly around, again, this is the geek bit, around how much it sort of recalibrates Britain's future productivity. It could do a big downgrade, bring itself in line with the Bank of England, which would cause a mega crisis for this government, or it could do something a bit more modest. Those decisions are in the hands of Richard Hughes and his colleagues at this increasingly high profile but unelected body. And I think people on the left are uncomfortable about it, just as Liz Truss. And would you mind if we change subject very briefly? I just want to talk, because there was a landslide yesterday, a landslide victory for Zack Polanski, who is now the new leader of the Greens. Is he going to shake things up?
Well, this is fascinating. Zack Polanski, as you say, confident, eco-populist, in there by a country mile, a green country mile, to be the leader of the Green Party. And this is going to prompt a lot of talk about the future of the left. Will the Greens work together with Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana's new party? Zack Polanski saying that he spoke with Corbyn briefly yesterday. He didn't rule out some sort of deal with the new party, but he says that his focus is on boosting the Greens first and foremost, and pointing out that in last year's election, they got 39 second place finishes and nearly 2 million votes. He has been public about the fact that he clearly is comfortable talking to Corbyn, even this week about Gaza. People will draw their own conclusions. And in fact, we have a deep dive into the future of the Greens and the left on our Westminster Insider podcast, coming to a feed near you at the end of the week.
I just think there's something really interesting going on with, well, should we call it the radical left? You've got the election to the leadership of the Green Party of an eco-populist who is talking about Gaza. He's talking about poverty. He's talking about sort of traditional harder left issues. And less about green things, less about the environment. Okay, pause that for a moment. In August, there was the appointment of a new head of the Friends of the Earth, a environmental charity, and he's called Asad Rehman. And in his opening interview with the Times, he said what keeps him up at night, it's not climate change. He said it is the prospect of a reform government getting into power. Okay, pause that one. Greta, the great environmental activist kind of our age, who for years took punchy action in order to raise the subject of the Earth and climate change and the future of the planet. She is now a Gaza activist. The radical left once attached itself to climate and the environment and still does do things under that banner, but have really pivoted to a whole series of other questions. My only question for you is, Anne, where does that leave climate politics? Where does that leave the environment? Because under the banner of the environment now, these organizations, these individuals, these thought leaders, and these politicians are pursuing a different agenda. And I just wonder where that leaves green issues, frankly, because they aren't doing what they say on the tin. These organizations so much now.
It does leave that gap, doesn't it? And particularly around what you would call, not just in party terms, but the more small c conservative end of the green movement, or people who people who just like to be protect the countryside, have a sort of conservationist view. With the more radical Greens, don't really like that language, and have a bit of a history on this, as that was a bit, sort of tendency that my mother had, and she was my late mother. She was a very sort of small c, sort of conservationist sort of green person who used to get then very freaked out when they asked her to go on the Rainbow Warrior or something. It was like, that was not her politics at all. And I think, you put your finger on it, that is now, that's sort of back. And that was an area Michael Gove, I think, was very keen, and others in the Conservative Party to grab hold of that. He still talks about the Conservatives needing to be green, but that's not the direction that they're going on climate with this withdrawal of Kemi Badenoch as fast as you can go from net zero commitments. So you've sort of lost that bit of, as you say, the more kind of moderate, but climate change focused, yes, but moderate policy end of the Greens. Labour's not that keen, seems to me anyway, to go there. But it is a block of voters, who just kind of want something to happen on climate change. They want action, but they probably are not so comfortable about getting embroiled with the more radical end of politics generally.
Also uncomfortable when we breach our 20-minute promise to our listeners. So let's do a hard out with that. And thank you very much indeed. A big day from Rachel Reeves ahead. We'll be back with that and more tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Sam.